Welcome back, everybody. We are incredibly excited to introduce this next session, a fireside chat with IBM President Jim Whitehurst. To lead the session, please welcome Jesus Mantas, Senior Managing Partner, Strategy, Innovation, and Corporate Development for IBM.
Hello, and thank you for letting us be part of your day for the next 45 minutes or so. I am here with Jim Whitehurst, president of the IBM company. Many of you may have known him for his prior jobs, which he will get to talk in a second. And we're going to talk about a number of topics, very relevant topics. We're going to talk about leadership. We're going to talk about open innovation and business models around that. We're going to talk about IBM and the new IBM direction, many things that you're reading about. And we'll talk about us personally in our day job. So let me actually just introduce Jim. And Jim, many people read about you, and you have done, what you do right now as president of IBM is the most recent, but everything you do builds up on the experience that you have acquired on many of your prior jobs. So why don't you talk a little bit about your career, about yourself?
Sure. Well, and I guess with IBM, I'd say it's my fourth job. So I started right out of college for a company called the Boston Consulting Group. And I thought I'd do that for a few years and then go back into technology because I had a degree in computer science. And, I loved it. I loved client service. I still love the idea of enabling people to be successful. And so I ended up staying. They sent me back to business school. I ended up being a partner there. And I don't think I would have ever left, but noon on 9/11, my largest client, Delta Airlines, called me and said, "We need you now to be our treasurer." So I became treasurer at Delta at noon on 9/11. And over a period of a few years, I became chief operating officer and kind of put together the plan and ran it through the bankruptcy restructuring that all the airlines went through in the years after 9/11 and oil price spikes. And when we came out the other side, the board brought in a new CEO. And so there really wasn't a role for me. And so I wanted to do something kind of disruptive, and I got a call about Red Hat. And I'd been using Linux at home for years, and so I'm a geek at heart, and so was really excited about the opportunity. So joined Red Hat. It was small at the time; it was under $500 million, and scaled it up to be an S&P 500 component, and whatever it was, 4-ish billion, 4.5 when we agreed to sell to IBM, and then I've been president of IBM since April. So I guess if you call IBM different than Red Hat, it's my fourth job in my career, but all kind of give me a perspective from consulting to running a big established kind of company driving efficiency to an innovative company to IBM, which is a mixture of the two.
Now, I think that's a perfect setting for where we're going next. Many of the people that are watching us right now, they're either they're Hispanic executives in technology, so they're kind of like in our industry, or they're people that aspire to become one of those executives. And you typically get these questions of what are those traits? And your career is a very interesting one, where you have the strategic side of your career as Boston Consulting Group. You have the operator side of your career at like probably one of the toughest jobs that any person could be given at the worst time for the industry. And then you mentioned at the end but I'm a geek at heart, so you knew Linux before most of the world knew. Why would that even matter, right? And you've done something about it. Anything on that journey that you would basically share with this very diverse group of people that how those traits help you every day do what you have to do?
Yeah, so I think that well, first off, I think being lucky is really, really important in careers. A lot of people want to go back and ascribe this like brilliant plan. I've pretty much just kind of really followed my gut and what I've loved to do. And so, I joined BCG because the people I met, I thought, hey, these are people I really get along with. I think I could work well with them. And I loved it, loved everything about it. And again, I don't think I would have ever left if it hadn't been for 9/11 and my largest client saying kind of need you now. And even that move was a bit because I knew the whole senior team there. And so again, that was kind of out of a sense of these are people I want to work with. I think the thing I learned most, though, out of BCG that I've tried to carry with me through Delta and then ultimately Red Hat is that the best ideas need to win. One of my stories from BCG that I remembered fondly, I was right out of college and doing projects with, all the way up through to partners at the firm. And this was back in the day when you wanted to upgrade to first class on an airline, you had these little stickers that you would buy like in a group of stickers, and whoever got to the gate first, would get the upgrades, whatever it was, 30 minutes or 45 minutes for the flight. And we would all get to the airport in a taxi or a car, whatever. And everybody from partner to associate would be running to the gate because whoever got there first would get the upgrade. So it wasn't about title. It was just whoever got there first. And that kind of breaking down hierarchy as a means to make sure that, the best ideas win has always stuck with me. And I try to bring that to Delta, which was very hierarchical and pretty different at Delta, to try to get that going. And all the way through my career. And so I'd say that's my biggest learning at BCG was if you break down hierarchy and really work to get the best ideas to win, you're going to succeed. Then Delta was an extraordinary experience. I think the thing that I most take away from Delta is that if you truly give people the context of what you're trying to do and why, people will rise up and do it. Delta is number one in on-time performance of the major carriers. And we did that in a difficult time because we explained the overall strategy of the company and what was required to be successful and what people could do about it. And people are willing to rise to the challenge when they know the context, they know the strategy. And so I've always flipped things around where I've said, I'm going to be less specific on the work steps that I want people to do, but everybody needs to understand the strategy of the company. Most organizations work the other way. It's like, well, you don't need to know the strategy, but here's your job. I think flipping that around was a real learning to me as we experimented at Delta and what worked, and trying to bring both those things to Red Hat. And the thing that kind of most stands out at Red Hat is I've finally realized there's no one right way to run an organization. There are different ways to run an organization for a different objective function. So at Delta, we had a much more hierarchical kind of approach with a really tight cadence because you're trying to drive high operating efficiency and on-time performance and safety. At Red Hat, when I first got there, I thought it was chaos. But it turns out it wasn't chaos. It was a looser management system set up to help drive a faster pace of innovation. And now at IBM, kind of bring that together because IBM has a mix of businesses that require both. And so really thinking about more kind of ambidextrous leadership to be able to do both, I think is critically important. I think most importantly out of all of this, I've loved the intellectual journey of it all. When asked, my sense of the single most important criteria for success is curiosity. If you're curious and you're interested, you will figure things out, you will be insightful. And to me, that's the most important kind of trait for any executive. And certainly when I'm trying to recruit or interview execs, that's where I always start off, is are they really deeply curious and interested in things?
That's great. So we're going to move to a section of this dialogue where we're gonna attack some what I would call common misconceptions. And I've seen you do that very well in many topics. One of them that we're going to start with is the misconception about innovation. Most people think that, innovation is something that you plan forward, but of course they only do that because they are looking at it backwards. They're looking at history and they're realigning history in their heads as to what actually happened and all of the biases of what actual decisions they believe they made that made this innovation great. But of course, this is a little bit like the lottery. It's like if you would know what the numbers of the lottery are, you would only buy the ticket that has those numbers. You wouldn't buy any others. But you only know those numbers after the fact, right? So you can always rationalize. So I have seen you write very elegantly about this topic, and I think is one key point that many organizations struggle, right? That many CFOs struggle, that many operating models struggle to say is like, well, why don't you just innovate? Just pick the good idea only and then go and do the good idea. It's like, yeah, but you know what? Most times, one, the good idea, the overnight success take 8 years. It takes a lot of work before you actually figure out that it was a good idea. And two, when you actually look backwards, sometimes they're more of an accident, as you said. You said before, is it pays off to be lucky, right? So you have to play that. So talk a little bit about that view, your view of innovation, and the misconception that people have, which is something that you look forward to, where in reality, you're learning backwards, and all you actually can do is create an environment that maximizes the probability of innovation.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think you said it very, very well. And so I spent a minute talking about how you intentionally create good luck, right? Because I think you're exactly right in that if you look through the course of history, how many ideas are written about after the fact as being, well, somebody had a brilliant idea and they built on it and planned out, et cetera. And then when you kind of have gone back and torn that down, it was a lot of luck, a lot of experimentation that ultimately kind of led there. And we always want to go back afterwards and apply intention, right? There's never good luck. There's bad luck, or there was good intention when you look back in the past, right? It's like, well, I always knew that was going to work. And that's generally not true. So as soon as you're willing to understand that and realize that most steps forward actually come, because of, just experiments that worked, an aha moment that's very, very hard to structure around, then you have to back up and say, okay, if I want to have an innovative organization, how do I make that happen, right? How do I make it so I can be lucky? Now, let me give two examples. So in the Red Hat case, we built a whole structured organization to say, hey, there are 1 million open source communities out there. How do we put a little bit of effort in a number of these things and see what happens? I was talking to the person at Red Hat who runs kind of the developer communities there. And as he said, look, we will observe and say, what are 50 interesting things that developers are doing in new open source projects? And we'll watch them for a while, and then we'll write a blog on 25 of them. And we'll look on how many of those, how many kind of interest we get. And then we'll take the top 6 or 7 of those, and we will run a webinar where we try to see who shows up. And we'll maybe run 2 webinars or whatever, and we'll see. And then we'll take the top 2 or 3 of those, and we'll have a live event, at one of our developer conferences. And then that slowly hones down to maybe one thing that we decide, okay, we may go take that to market. So the ability to recognize you need a broad aperture, because you just don't know what's going to be successful or not. Other example, kind of taking more of a top-down approach, I was in a board meeting at a major global bank, and the CEO was demanding, we need to have a digital payment strategy, and I want to see what the strategy is, and blah, 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 blah. And there was a break, and I pulled the CEO aside, and I said, look, that is the wrong approach. And like, what do you mean? And I said, well, look, the likelihood that you're going to pick right on a digital payment strategy is like 1 in 1,000. Innovation is more, if you want to take the analogy, taking a handful of seeds and throwing them out in the field. Now, one of those seeds is probably going to grow into a tree, but trying to look at beforehand and say which of those seeds is going to grow in a tree probably isn't going to work well. So what I said is you ought to go in there and say, look, I want to run 25 experiments, and nobody can spend more than $100,000 on an experiment. And we're going to come back in 90 days, and we're going to see what did we learn and figure out the next set of experiments we're going to run, or if one of those is really good, maybe we'll take it a little further, and we're just going to keep experimenting. So this idea of how do you make sure you're experimenting and trying enough things to ultimately be able to kind of home in on something that's actually working is such a better approach than try to prescribe a set of activities and thinking that those are likely to work forward. So there's this sense of, XYZ's lucky. Well, if you believe that there's going to be some serendipity in what you do, it's like, well, how do you create an environment where you're more likely to have that than not? And that's how do you create a culture that enables experimentation? How do you make sure management systems, whether those are budgets or others, kind of give a little bit of latitude to do that? And that's not to say you go all the way. I've heard this at IBM. It's like, oh, well, if I just had a budget and didn't have any oversight, I could try all kind of things. Like, well, no, we all have discipline. So it's how do you create the little bits on the margin to experiment and try, yet still recognizing as a public company, whether it's Red Hat or IBM, we still have quarters to hit. And so, but you can via culture and just a little bit of slack, create a chance for that experimentation to happen.
Yeah, and I think you lead me to another one of, I think, the big misconceptions out there. And again, I think I've seen you write and speak very eloquently to this point. Most people out there talk about culture and talk about creating a culture. But as you've written very clearly, culture is an output, it's a consequence. Yeah. So if you want to create a culture, the answer is you don't. You actually work on the leading elements of it that eventually results on that culture. So if somebody says, I want to create a culture for innovation, as a statement, that is probably wrong, is you want to create an environment that will create habits that lead to a culture of innovation. So talk about your viewpoint on that, because that is a very big lever, right? Like this point of innovation is like, well, I'm only going to pick the winning lottery tickets. Not a really good strategy. That's almost like a tennis player saying, only hit the winning shots. Like, I won't know if it's a winning shot until the ball bounces. So I can do that. So in this culture, it's like, oh, I'm going to create a culture for innovation. Talk about your view on that.
Yeah, so look, this is something I've painfully watched for, frankly, a number of Red Hat customers over time that will be so excited about going on a DevOps journey or Agile, and they buy the software and they expect it all to happen, and then it doesn't. Or they go on an Agile journey and say, oh, well, my culture is just not ready for Agile. We're not innovative. I need to go focus on my culture. And, almost always they immediately say, all right, I'm going to shine a light on how I get my culture to be more innovative. The problem with that is culture is an output, and it's an output of the leadership traits, that your behaviors, what you reward, how you act, who you promote. It's a outcome of your management processes. Like, you can say be innovative, but if your incentive compensation systems or your management cadence are so tightly wound to hit specific KPIs, that doesn't leave room for innovation. It can even be your org structure and how you've decided to set up the organization. All those things can affect what people in the organization perceive that leaders find as important, and therefore your culture becomes kind of an output of that. So, not to make it too simple, but I'd say the single biggest thing that impacts culture is the attributes of the people who are promoted. As a leader, you can say anything you want, you can talk about what's important, but if you then promote people who are exhibiting a different set of behaviors based on a different set of values, people aren't going to listen to what you say. So really thinking about culture as an output and starting off with leadership traits and behaviors, thinking about where you spend your time, what you're saying is important, your supporting management processes, fix those things and culture will follow. And once the culture gets going, it is a reinforcing cycle. So once it's there, it'll help reinforce itself, which is a good thing in an environment where you have a healthy culture. When you're trying to go from a culture that you want to change to something new, it's hard because, again, you got to get the flywheel going, which is why leaders have to be so focused on it to make it happen, but always come around. There was a CEO of a Fortune 25 company. I don't want to give his name because this was a personal conversation, but he said, I spent so long trying to transform my company. And then I woke up one day and realized, oh my God, it needs to start with me transforming myself before we're going to get any progress on transforming the company. And I think that's really, really, really well said. Leaders who try to say everybody else changed, if you're not willing to kind of go down that path, you're not going to make progress.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think, again, it's as you said, is a very common misconception that keeps coming up. And I thought it was a very powerful message. We're going to move to another segment of this dialogue, your IBM life. So, we talked about your BCG life, your Red Hat life, and kind of like, your IBM life and your Red Hat life, we could package them together, but you do have a different job in the IBM company right now. And I think maybe I'm going to build up to the IBM strategy, because one of the misconceptions I think there may be in people's heads is what they may believe the IBM strategy is versus what you believe you're going to drive the IBM strategy to be, right? But I think it starts with a conversation. I think the first time that you and I met, it made an impact on me how well you describe what you learn from open source as a powerful model for innovation, but not a powerful model to make money. Because when everything is free, it's really not a good. So how do you take something like that? I think your words were open source is a really good thing for innovation, but it's a very bad business model, right? If you want to ever raise capital or make money or pay your bills as an entrepreneur and you're giving away everything for free, probably is not going to work out very well. So talk about your view of that, because I'm going to use that to then build a little bit into what IBM's strategy going forward is and why open as a feature for you is so important, but that doesn't mean it's not commercially relevant.
Yeah, no, it's a really important point. And I would argue it's probably the single biggest reason company strategies fail, which is there are two components of any strategy, right? There is creating a product or a service and offering, whatever that is, that creates value for the end consumer of that, right? If you're not creating value well in excess of your costs, you're obviously not going to be successful. But there's a second piece of that is making sure that you're doing it in a competitively differentiated way so that you're able to extract some of that value for your shareholders and for the company to be able to reinvest. And, I think I'm heavily colored by my time in the airline business. So at Delta, if you look at the airline industry in general over the last, 100 years, it is, I would argue, created enormous value for society. Whether you're talking about the business value of airline hubs and international businesses and people moving around and being able to make sales calls, and to the societal value of being able to go to college where you want to, or, go live with a loved one, but still keep in touch with your family and bringing societies closer together, et cetera. Tremendous value. But if you look through the history of aviation, the cumulative profits of the industry are negative. The very famous investor, Warren Buffett, once said that if a value investor had been around at Kitty Hawk, he would have shot Orville down. Right? So just because you create a lot of value in what you do, if you haven't also built a model to allow you to kind of extract some for the industry, the entity that you're with, whether that's to reinvest or to pay people or pay your shareholders, whatever you're using some of that for, you're not going to be successful. And this has been one of the biggest challenges people have had with open source is everyone is enamored, or not everyone, but people who know it are enamored with just the power of the innovation model, right? First off, you just get tens of thousands of people all contributing, which is extraordinary. And it's not only people contributing, it's not just crowdsourcing. You get some of the most sophisticated users solving their own problems, and user-driven innovation is just such a powerful concept. So one of the reasons we've seen an explosion of open source innovation in the last decade is as Web 2.0 has taken off, when Twitter or Google or LinkedIn or Yahoo or Facebook have a problem, they're willing to solve those problems in source code, and they're willing to give that code away. That's why so many of the innovations in big data and AI and Agile and DevOps are all coming out of open source. So it's an extraordinary way for innovation to occur. The problem has been, okay, well, that's great, but it's free. And, our first way to solve that problem, in technology was to say, well, we get this free thing called intellectual property. Well, let's make it non-free by, encumbering it with patents or copyrights. And okay, now we've artificially created scarcity, which is perfectly fine. And it creates business models that allow you to sell a license to software which is perfectly valid. The problem is, as soon as you do this, you lose the power of the openness for people to contribute. And so one of the things I do think that Red Hat did well is, and that IBM is certainly we're bringing into IBM now, is this ability to say, okay, the innovation's free. How do we kind of create offerings that add value on top of that? So whether it's the Red Hat model, which is, okay, well, you still need to life cycle this and commit to, kind of a 10 to 15-year life against these things with security updates and patches, create platforms with certifications. Those are various things that we can do that add value on top of open source. So the code can still all be open source, but we can add value beyond what the content of the code itself. And so this is where really teasing apart a value chain. I've had 3 or 4 conversations with university presidents on this, which is, as the content of education goes free, what do we do as a university? And my point is, well, no, you just get really smart about everything that goes into university education. It's not just about the content. Just like enterprise software is not just about the content. So we've kind of deconstructed that. So we still get the extraordinary power of user-driven innovation and this kind of just mass innovation happening out there, but then adding really a tremendous amount of value that we can add on top of that open innovation as a business model.
So now translate that to IBM. If you were to describe to anybody listening, when you think of IBM and when you think of IBM strategy, this is what we're going to be about. What would that be?
So one more observation on IBM, and then I'll dive deeper into the strategy. Ironically, if I had to say, one of the broad issues that IBM has is we are, in some ways, and very positively, we are so focused on clients and client success that we have a tendency to kind of run into the same problem the airline industry has, where it's like, let's solve client problems and let's do it, and let's kind of all hands on deck. We're going to throw all our AI content, et cetera, into these, without necessarily thinking about, well, how are we retaining those and kind of creating kind of advantage products out of it? So in some ways, it's very endearing that we've been able to, help so many clients with so many really complex problems and add so much value. Bluntly, we haven't done as good a job in this more recent kind of decade of saying, okay, how are we kind of defining that kind of competitive moat around that kind of business model? And so it's one of the things I'm really excited about with the IBM strategy now, which is saying, all right, we see a massive problem out there, and that is as we move to these kind of cloud-based architectures, we risk taking the industry back 30 years to vertical stacks. And again, this isn't anybody trying to do anything wrong. It's just as the public clouds, including IBM's cloud, look to continue to innovate, we have a tendency to say, so what's a client need? Okay, I'm going to go solve that client need, and that might span layers of the stack. And that's exactly what we did in the mini computer days and the Unix days, where you kind of didn't get these stacks, and you say, well, I want to get this from Sun, and I want to get this from IBM AIX, and this from HPUX, and next thing you get these spaghetti architectures because everybody's is innovating, and you want different things over time from different people. So I think IBM quickly has seen this, which is same thing's happening with cloud, where clouds aren't just places to run software; they're actually via APIs and services, they're innovators. And so IBM Cloud is innovating. We talked about what we're doing with Hamilton and the financial services. Google's doing a lot of things on the data side. Amazon's doing other things, and Azure others. And so the problem with each of these vertical stovepipes is, well, look, we're going to go back to this old world where you're going to have this spaghetti architectures. And so IBM's strategy has been, hey, we need to have a horizontal approach to this. The same thing that Linux did that broke that original kind of vertical stovepipe. We say we need to have one infrastructure that cuts across all of these various clouds. And so you can write once and run your workloads anywhere. And therefore, over time, as innovation moves around, you have flexibility to move your workloads, whether it's for cost reason or innovation or competitive, whatever reasons you want to do that. And so we think that's critical for IT users to have choice going forward. Now, that is totally built on open source. So this is where we continue to leverage the power of open. It's all open source in these platforms that we're looking to build. Now, then around that, so you say, okay, well, that is, I would argue, incredibly valuable for our clients, right? The ability to have choice over time. You will be able to innovate faster. So it's not about cost. I mean, there's a little bit about cost, but it's about having the agility to move it at the pace you want to move, to have the choices to be able to source innovation from wherever you want to source it from is incredibly valuable. But now let's get to the second. And by the way, when we go out and talk to clients, we can demonstrate, we talk about internally 2.5x value. We can demonstrate so much value to a hybrid cloud approach versus, kind of stovepipe multi-cloud separate, kind of stack approach. They're saying, okay, well, how do we extract that value, some of that for our company and therefore our shareholders to be able to reinvest? And the nice part about a platform is platforms kind of create kind of centers of mass. So we actually are looking to land this as a platform. So therefore ISVs can certify to our platform. It's called OpenShift, and then they know they can run it anywhere. So there's value to building applications that run on our platform. Well, once those applications run on our platform, well, more people need to buy the platform. So it's this network effect, which creates powerful business models. Just one quick example, Schlumberger, we made a recent announcement with them. They have this incredible, software that helps enable oil and gas companies to do kind of seismic, research. And they had originally built it on one of the public clouds. And they went out to try to take it to market. And people said, well, I'm not using this cloud, I'm using that cloud. Or others like, well, hey, I'm in, somewhere in Africa. I don't want to use any cloud. I want to have it on premise. And so they've kind of come back, they're writing on our platform, and now they can run it anywhere on any cloud, however anybody wants to run it. So the power of that is extraordinary. Now for us then, ISVs write to this platform. Now people who want to use those applications want our platform, and we kind of get the benefit of the network effect. So we really are building a business model that recognizes that. And then of course, importantly to that is platforms themselves have value. And so we certainly look to do that. But then on that platform, because we're kind of there kind of helping lay that down, we're also the first major user, which gives us kind of, we would argue, a first mover advantage. So all of our software runs on that platform. If you want to run IBM software on any cloud environment, you can do it because we put it on this platform that runs anywhere. So we've put all of our software in cloud packs. We've taken our services organization, and we have the largest certified set of professionals who can build hybrid cloud applications. And so, we're seeing tremendous progress there. So internally, we call it the fourth platform. We talk about waves of platforms that IBM has built in the past that have been truly industry making. And this is the fourth platform. This is the right way to architect your IT in a cloud era. And we have a clear, unambiguous lead there that we're working to continue to build on. So I'm sorry to go on so long on it, but I'm really excited about the strategy where we are, not just that it is by far the most valuable for clients versus getting stuck in these stovepipes, but it also is constructed in a way that we are competitively advantaged, so we can build a sustainable business around it.
So clearly the passion comes through that, this is not just the kind of like the job that you do, that you really feel very strongly about the value that can be added to the industry by a strategy like this. But to your point, I'm going to try to synthesize, maybe simplify, which is, before some of the preconceptions that people may have to do with IBM, it may come from, a very successful age of IBM, of the mainframe, which is you buy, as you said, the vertical stack. I mean, the value proposition is the thing is going to work, the thing is economically effective, and the thing is, that whatever business problem that solves, it solves at the best economic and it lasts forever, right? But you're in that vertical stack. You cannot take any program that is optimized for that and kind of like do it around without a lot of cost, So what you're saying is you're bringing IBM, it's almost like a back to the future, right? Is a little bit what the PC era client service kind of like did to that. It questioned what are the layers and how do you optimize? You're basically saying, if you don't look at IBM's strategy, you could select one of the public clouds and then migrate to one of those public clouds. But because of what you said of innovation, you're probably going to be restricted to the way that public cloud is going to solve problems. And you may find in another public cloud that they have something really interesting that you want to use. But if you use many of them, then the complexity of putting these things together is going to almost like offset everything that you were trying to do. And it so happens that over 90% of clients out there will have more than one cloud. We already know that. So it's not like a hypothetical. We know it's a real problem that people are going to have many of these public clouds. And what you're saying is IBM is going to give you this over the top where the one thing that you do, we IBM will guarantee that that thing will run in any cloud you want, whether it's publicly or privately or on an edge device, So if we say that it's going to run on that layer, you're saving a lot of time because one, you don't need to do 3 versions of that application. You only need to have once. And then the agility, to your point, is like if you change the logic on how your middle sets are going to be blocked, you only have to do it in one place. And the next second is going to get to in however many hundreds of places that application is running. You don't need to go and change 100 applications. So that is a little bit that value proposition, which is very different from, I think if we would take a poll of the audience, maybe 3 years ago, would think of IBM as the closed option. And you're basically bringing it the other way around, saying it's like, no, we actually want IBM to be the one that allows you to just do whatever you need in whichever cloud you need.
No, exactly right. Exactly right. It's the world has changed. And I think one of the extraordinary things about IBM, having, frankly, being relatively new to IBM, coming from Red Hat, that I've been so impressed with is our willingness to change fundamentally kind of who we are and what we do to serve the current need of enterprises with technology. We used to be in the networking business. Well, no longer needed to be that. We used to be in the x86 world. Well, not a lot of incremental value there as it commoditized. So we've continued to skate to where the puck is going. And, there are obviously kind of ups and downs as we've kind of gone through that. But I think as we're seeing this emerge, we are clearly betting all in that open and open source is the right innovation model for infrastructure. Everything that we're doing on the infrastructure level is open source. Obviously, if you look at AI, we provide a ton of open source, but then we kind of can add value, we believe, on top of that in enterprise needs. But platform-wise, we fully believe in open choice for where you want to run applications. And I do think that is part of our observation over time, that the commoditization of infrastructure is incredibly powerful and valuable, and therefore the appropriate approach for where we are today. And then innovation needs to happen on top of that. And we're helping make that happen. To me, the most important thing, though, and I just want to come back, and the reason you hear me so emphatic about it and so excited about it is how technology architectures kind of emerge in kind of these new, I hate to overuse the word, but paradigms of computing, last, and they have impact. And I am absolutely convinced that if we do not win this battle, if we don't have a horizontal choiceful platform, innovation in our society will be slower, right? Innovation is faster when we have choice, when we have flexibility. We talked a little bit about these future. When you innovate, you don't know what the future is going to look like. Well, therefore, you need to have flexibility. We will invent drugs and vaccines faster. We will create autonomous driving faster. We will do things we hadn't even imagined faster with a hybrid cloud platform that provides choice. So it's not just about, IBM in this quarter and next year in this platform. It really does help set the foundation for the pace of innovation that we're going to see over the next decade. And so we are passionate about this battle that is being fought now. And frankly, we're very confident that we're on the right side of that battle, and, right generally wins, or at least I'm an optimist and believe that.
Yeah, so in the last 5 minutes that we have, I'm going to take you there. So we have talked a lot about, again, your background and experience. I think we've talked about how that projects on what you have observed and the way in which we're transforming IBM to be something very different from the conception that people may have. But now I'm gonna go to what doesn't change, right? And the values that a company like IBM has sponsored, sitting at the intersection of society, business, and technology. At that intersection, one of those values that I know you are very passionate, and I am very passionate for the Hispanic community, is diversity and inclusion. And the value of diversity and inclusion. So I would love to for you to share your perspective of that ingredient in both the innovation equation, in both the risk mitigation equation, and both the adding value to society equation. Diversity and inclusion, as you see, as part of what we do as leaders every day, and as part of what company strategies need to do. What are your thoughts on that? And I think any takeaways that you think any of us watching this should be doing on Monday about diversity and inclusion at a point that, especially I would say in North America, but it's a global effect, is being challenged in so many different ways.
Yeah, well, so two major observations. So first off, when we talk about this kind of open innovation and how you actually get kind of groups to experiment and try, there is study after study after study that says diversity in background, in viewpoint, broadly leads to better ideas emerging. And, I think the important, it's both diversity and it's how people work together. I often talk about open sourcing is different than crowdsourcing. Crowdsourcing is say, let me get a million ideas, from a million people. And, one of those ideas is likely to be good. Open source is actually, how do I take, well, maybe it's a million ideas, but the 30 or 40 that are best, infuse those together to be ideas that were better than any single individual could come up with. That's the essence of open source. It's also the essence of what we're looking to do at IBM, where we're saying, how do we get people to come together and kind of work together to create great ideas? And that requires diversity. And I know we're running tight on time, but I have to say one of the most extraordinary things that I've seen as being part of IBM is how we don't just talk about it. Frankly, a lot of tech companies talk about it. We drive it into our cadence. In my staff meetings, we are always talking about diversity. We are carefully thinking about it. We're debating it. It's not once a quarter for 5 minutes. It is core to how we run the organization, how we measure ourselves, which is just extraordinary to see. And it's been, one of the most gratifying things to be a part of IBM is we don't just talk about it. We absolutely live it down deep in our DNA and how we work and how we operate, both in terms of making sure that we are getting the right diversity and then how we're looking to enable that diversity in the company. So I've been incredibly gratified to be part of IBM and kind of how we've been able to do it. And it shows in our numbers. We don't brag about it, but our numbers are generally dramatically better than other technology companies because we focused on it for decades, because I think we've seen this for a long time and the importance of it for such a long time.
Yeah, and when it's a value, it doesn't change. So Jim, I think I would love to stay another few days talking with you, but I'm going to wrap up with a few notes that I took. I think your point of best ideas win. So just make sure that we internalize that. I thought it was very interesting. If you have to choose whether somebody knows the steps to their jobs or somebody intimately understands the strategy on the company, choose the latter. I mean, of course, if you can get both, but the latter is more powerful because they can make decisions when you're not there dictating that will align with that strategy. And that's 90% of the decisions they're going to be making is, the ones that nobody's watching over. The one trait that you would put on top of any other, curiosity. Who gets promoted drives the most culture. So I think that was a very important point. And I guess I will wrap it on a very interesting phrase, but your advice is do not leave serendipity to chance. Engineer environments so serendipity happens with more probability than if you wouldn't have. That is your actual lever. It's not deterministic, it's probabilistic. You can actually create environments, create teamwork, create operating models that will maximize what that output is. So as always, as I'm with you, I learned a lot. I will let you maybe wrap up for the audience. And again, thank you, Jim, for this dialogue.
Well, as usual, I mean, you were more articulate and certainly more succinct than me on those comments. So I appreciate that. I loved your summary there. Look, what I'd say kind of broadly is, for everyone, I mean, you're in an extraordinary industry at an extraordinary time. When you start thinking about the impact that the technology industry is going to have over the next few decades, it's never been larger. And so it's an exciting place to be. And what I would say is, it is also gratifying that it's an industry of people and ideas and how people work together. And so, I would really encourage you. We've always see this, that groups come to better decisions, have better ideas and outcomes than individuals working, apart. So I hope you will find a group, your group. Hopefully, for many of you, that will be IBM, where you can really make an impact on the world. And who can ask for more than that? So I really do appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation. And thank you all for listening. And good luck in your careers as well.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jim.